The sun hung like a brass coin in the sky, beating down on the weathered buildings of sandstone. Dust devils spiraled across the town square, where a lone figure stood motionless amid the afternoon bustle. The man wore a threadbare coat despite the heat, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. People gave him a wide berth as they passed. Some stared openly, others pretended not to notice, but all felt the weight of his presence. The stranger's nose twitched slightly as a well-dressed man approached, the mayor, with his gold watch chain gleaming and his smile fixed firmly in place. "Fine afternoon," the mayor called out, nodding to various townspeople who responded with deferential greetings. The stranger's weathered face remained impassive, but his nostrils flared. He watched the mayor pass, then muttered to himself, "Smells like copper pennies and spoiled milk." An old woman shuffling past heard him and quickened her pace, clutching her basket tighter. The stranger didn't seem to notice. His eyes remained fixed on the mayor until the man disappeared into the grand building at the far end of the square. Gus had been drifting for nearly 20 years. The lines etched into his face told stories of hard winters and harder choices. His eyes, pale blue and unervingly direct, had seen things most folks would rather forget. He carried nothing but a small pack and the clothes on his back, a man untethered from the world. Sandstone wasn't much different from a dozen other towns he'd passed through. Founded on silver dreams that had long since tarnished, it clung to life through stubborn determination and carefully maintained appearances. The buildings along Main Street wore fresh paint on their facades, but their sides and backs revealed rotting wood and crumbling mortar. Mayor Harold Finch had held office for 15 years. A round man with a booming laugh, he greeted everyone by name and remembered their children's birthdays. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct, his generosity legendary. When the drought came 3 years back, it was the mayor who organized relief. When the mine closed, it was the mayor who found new buyers. Yet beneath the surface, Sandstone whispered. Conversations halted when certain names were mentioned. Some properties changed hands with suspicious regularity. The sheriff deferred to the mayor on matters that should have been his alone to decide. Gus took a room at the boarding house run by Mrs. Abernathy, a stern widow who asked no questions beyond whether he could pay in advance. He placed $3 silver on her counter and received a key to a small room with a narrow bed and a view of the alley below. That evening, as Gus sat on the boarding house porch watching the street empty for the night, a woman approached. She wore black, her face partially concealed by a veil, though not enough to hide her beauty or the redness around her eyes. "You're the man they're talking about," she said without preamble. "The one who says he can smell lies." Gus didn't answer immediately. He studied her face, the way her hands twisted a handkerchief. "Folks talk too much," he finally said. "My name is Clara Wilson." She glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "My husband died 3 months ago. They said it was an accident at the mine, but Thomas wasn't careless. I don't involve myself in other people's troubles, ma'am. Please." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. This was in Thomas's coat. "I found it after the funeral." Gus hesitated, then took the paper. The writing was hurried, the ink smudged in places, vault behind the painting. "Ledger proves everything. F knows. Be careful." "F is Mayor Finch," Clara said. "Thomas worked as his clerk. He was troubled in the weeks before he died. Said things weren't right with the town accounts." Gus refolded the paper and handed it back. "What do you expect me to do? Help me find the truth." Her voice cracked. "People say you have a gift, that you can tell when someone's lying." "Not a gift," Gus said. "Just something I noticed as a boy. Lies have a scent, different for different people, but always there. Will you help me?" Gus looked away, toward the darkening street. He'd sworn never to put down roots again, never to care about anyone else's problems. Yet something in her desperation called to him, reminded him of ghosts he'd been running from for too long. "I'll see what I can find out," he said finally. No promises. The relief on her face was immediate and devastating. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." The next day, Gus began his quiet investigation. He spent the morning at the general store, listening more than talking. The shopkeeper, a man named Ellis, was eager to share local gossip. "Mayor's been good to this town," Ellis said as he measured coffee beans. "Course, some folks are never satisfied. That Wilson fellow, for instance, always poking his nose where it didn't belong. That right?" Gus asked, feigning only mild interest. "Troublemaker, if you ask me. Accident was probably for the best, saved everybody a lot of grief." Gus's nostrils flared slightly. The scent was there, acrid and sharp, like vinegar. "You knew him well?" "Well enough." Ellis shrugged. "Mayor took him on as a favor to his wife's family. Clara always did think her husband was better than the rest of us. Over the next few days, Gus established a routine. Mornings at the general store or the barber shop, afternoons wandering the town, evenings at the saloon where liquor loosened tongues. He began to build a picture of Sandstone, not the one presented to visitors, but the real town underneath. Mayor Finch controlled everything. The businesses, the land deals, even the church seemed to bend to his will. Those who cooperated prospered. Those who didn't suffered mysterious setbacks or left town altogether. Clara met him secretly every few days, usually at dusk near the old oak tree outside town. She brought him information, names of people who might talk, details about her husband's final weeks. Thomas changed after he started working directly with the mayor's private accounts, she told him one evening. He'd wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Said he was in too deep to get out. Did he ever mention a vault? Gus asked. No, but he did say the mayor kept something behind the painting in his office, a safe or strongbox. Thomas never saw inside it. As the days passed, Gus found himself drawn deeper into Clara's life. She showed him a small locket with a picture of Thomas, a serious young man with kind eyes. She told him about their plans to leave Sandstone someday, to start fresh somewhere with opportunities. We were saving, she said. Every penny. Then after he died, I couldn't find our money. The tin box where we kept it was empty. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. Gus waited until the streets emptied, then made his way to the town hall. The back door was locked, but a window on the ground floor had a broken latch, something he'd noticed days earlier. Inside, the building was silent except for the drumming of rain on the roof. Gus moved carefully through the darkened corridors until he reached the mayor's office. The door yielded to his lockpicks, and he slipped inside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white bursts. The painting Clara had mentioned hung behind the desk, a landscape of sandstone in its early days. Gus lifted it carefully from the wall, revealing a small safe embedded in the plaster. This would take more time. He set to work with his picks, listening for the subtle clicks as the tumblers fell into place. Outside, the storm intensified, masking any sounds he might make. The safe finally opened, but it contained only a single key, ornate and heavy. No ledger, no documents. Gus pocketed the key and continued searching the office. Under the thick carpet, he found a loose floorboard. Prying it up revealed a small space containing a leather-bound journal. Gus took it to the window, using the intermittent lightning to read its contents. The journal contained the mayor's private thoughts and his confessions. Page after page detailed bribes, threats, and manipulations. Land seized through falsified tax records. Miners cheated of their pay. And Thomas Wilson, a problem that needed solving. Wilson found the ledger, one entry read. Says he'll go to the county judge if I don't make it right. Fool doesn't understand there's no going back now. Sheriff will handle it. Mining accident. Clean, simple. Gus felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. He tucked the journal into his coat and continued searching, but found nothing more of value. As he prepared to leave, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. He froze, extinguishing his small candle. The office door opened slowly, and a figure entered, Sheriff Dawson, his gun drawn. I know you're in here, the sheriff said quietly. Come on out, nice and easy. Gus remained motionless in the shadows behind the desk. The sheriff moved further into the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Mayor said you might be trouble, Dawson continued. Said you've been asking too many questions. We don't much care for that in Sandstone. Lightning flashed again, and for an instant, the sheriff's eyes met Gus's. The gun swung toward him, but Gus was already moving. He lunged forward, knocking the sheriff's arm upward as the gun discharged into the ceiling. They grappled briefly before Gus landed a solid blow to the man's temple. The sheriff crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Gus bound and gagged him with curtain cords, then slipped out the way he had come. The storm provided cover as he made his way back to the boarding house, the journal and key heavy in his pocket. The next morning, Gus sought out Clara. They met at the oak tree, where he showed her what he'd found. This proves it, she said, her voice trembling as she read the journal entries about her husband. But what does the key open? I don't know yet, Gus admitted. But your husband mentioned a vault. It has to be somewhere important, somewhere the mayor controls completely. They spent the day discreetly checking buildings associated with the mayor, his home, the town hall, even the bank. None revealed anything that might require the ornate key. That evening, as they sat in Clara's small kitchen, she suddenly straightened. The old mine office, she said. Thomas mentioned once that the mayor kept it locked up tight, even though the mine's been closed for years. Said no one was allowed inside. The building stood at the edge of town, a squat stone structure that had once administered the silver mine operations. Its windows were boarded up, its doors secured with a heavy padlock. They waited until well after midnight before approaching. The padlock yielded to Gus's picks, and they slipped inside. The interior was dusty but surprisingly well-maintained. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a large desk dominated the center of the main room. "Look for anything unusual," Gus whispered. "Hidden panels, loose floorboards." They searched methodically, their lantern casting long shadows. Finally, behind a bookcase that moved on well-oiled hinges, they found it. A metal door set into the stone wall, with a keyhole that matched their key. The door opened silently, revealing a room lined with shelves. On those shelves sat neat rows of ledgers, boxes of documents, and bags of coins and currency. Along one wall stood a cabinet containing deeds, contracts, and letters, the documentary evidence of years of corruption. "My God," Clara breathed. "He's been stealing from everyone." Gus opened one of the ledgers. It contained 2 columns, official numbers reported to the county, and the actual figures. The difference was substantial and had been siphoned directly to the mayor's private accounts. "Here," Clara said suddenly, holding up a tin box. "This is ours." I recognized the scratch on the lid. Inside was the money Thomas had saved, their dream of escape, stolen by the mayor after he'd had Thomas killed. They gathered what evidence they could carry, the most damning ledgers, the journal, and several incriminating letters. As they prepared to leave, Gus paused. "What will you do with this?" he asked. Clara looked at him steadily. "What Thomas would have done. Take it to the county judge. Make it right. Finch won't go down easily." "I know." She hesitated. "Will you stay? Help me finish this." The question hung between them. Gus had never stayed anywhere for long, had never allowed himself to form attachments. Yet something had changed in these past weeks. The town's pain had become his own, and Clara's quest for justice had awakened something he thought long dead. "I'll stay until it's done," he said finally. The next morning, they began gathering allies. First Jacob Turner, who'd lost his farm to the mayor's machinations. Then Bill Hargrove, whose son had died in the same accident as Thomas. Slowly, cautiously, a group formed. People who had suffered under the mayor's rule and were willing to stand against him. Word spread through town. The sheriff, recovered from his encounter with Gus, watched with growing unease as people gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. He reported to the mayor, who dismissed the concerns. "They're nothing," Finch said, pouring himself a generous whiskey. "Sheep without a shepherd. They'll scatter at the first sign of trouble." But the mayor underestimated the power of the truth, once unleashed. By midday, nearly 30 people had gathered at Clara's house, examining the evidence and sharing their own stories of the mayor's corruption. "We take this to the town meeting tonight," Jacob Turner said. "Let everyone see what kind of man has been leading them." The town hall was packed that evening. Mayor Finch stood at the podium, his usual confident smile in place as he called the meeting to order. He had just begun speaking about road improvements when the doors at the back of the hall swung open. Gus entered first, followed by Clara and the others. They moved purposefully down the center aisle, carrying ledgers and documents. The mayor's smile faltered. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" he demanded. Gus stepped forward. "We've come to return something that belongs to the town," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent hall. "The truth." Clara placed the ledgers on the table at the front of the room. "My husband died because he discovered what Mayor Finch has been doing," she announced. "Stealing from all of us, using his position to enrich himself at our expense." The mayor's face flushed dark red. "These are baseless accusations. Sheriff, remove these people immediately." Sheriff Dawson hesitated, looking from the mayor to the growing anger on the faces of the townspeople. Jacob Turner opened one of the ledgers. "These are the real numbers from the mine closure," he said. "The compensation we were supposed to receive, half of it went into Finch's pocket." One by one, they presented their evidence. The missing tax money, the falsified deeds, the bribes from outside interests, and finally, the journal entries about Thomas Wilson and the other problems the mayor had solved. Throughout it all, Gus stood silently, watching the mayor's face. The smell was overwhelming now, fear and lies mingling into something almost visible. When the mayor finally spoke, his voice had lost its authoritative boom. "These documents are forgeries," he said weakly. "This is a conspiracy to undermine the legitimate government of Sandstone." Gus stepped forward then. "I've spent my life drifting from place to place," he said quietly. "I've seen men like you in every town, men who take what isn't theirs, who build their lives on other people's misery. I can smell the lies on you, Mayor. They stink like rotting meat." The mayor lunged suddenly, reaching inside his coat. Sheriff Dawson moved faster, grabbing the man's arm before he could draw the small pistol concealed there. "That's enough, Harold," the sheriff said. "It's over." The room erupted in shouts and movement. Some called for immediate justice, others for the county authorities. Through it all, Gus watched as the carefully constructed world of sandstone collapsed and began to rebuild itself around the truth. Later that night, as the county sheriff led Mayor Finch away in handcuffs, Clara found Gus sitting alone on the steps of the town hall. "They're talking about holding a special election," she said, sitting beside him. "Jacob Turner might run. Things will be different now." Gus nodded. "Towns have a way of healing themselves, given the chance." She studied his face in the moonlight. "You're leaving, aren't you?" "Soon," he admitted. "I'm not made for staying in one place." "You could be," she said softly, "if you wanted to." For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine it, a life in sandstone, perhaps with Clara, once enough time had passed. A home, roots, connections. The thought was both tempting and terrifying. "There are other towns," he said finally. "Other mayors. Other lies that need uncovering." She didn't argue, just sat with him in companionable silence as the stars wheeled overhead. 2 days later, Gus stood at the edge of town, his few possessions packed. Clara had come to see him off, along with Jacob Turner and several others whose lives had been changed by what they now called the reckoning. "The county judge is reopening all the cases," Jacob told them. "Land will be returned, accounts settled. It'll take time, but we'll make it right." "Good," Gus said simply. Clara handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for the road," she said. Inside was bread, cheese, and a small tin of coffee. And beneath the food, Thomas's pocket watch. "I can't take this," Gus protested. "He would have wanted you to have it," she insisted. A reminder that even small actions can change everything. Gus tucked the watch carefully into his coat. Then, with a final nod to the gathered townspeople, he turned and began walking toward the distant mountains. As he passed the old oak tree at the edge of town, he paused. From his pocket, he withdrew the mayor's journal, the one piece of evidence he had kept. Kneeling, he dug a small hole among the roots and buried the book deep in the soil. Some truths needed to be known. Others were best left to rest in darkness, their poison contained. The tree would guard this one, adding it to the countless secrets it had witnessed over the years. Gus stood and continued on his way, a solitary figure growing smaller against the vast landscape. Behind him, sandstone began its slow transformation, built on painful truth rather than comfortable lies. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the scent of sage. Gus lifted his face to it, breathing deeply. For the first time in many years, all he could smell was the clean, honest scent of the coming rain.